Here we are again at the crafting table. In a previous video, we worked on building up some foam core tile bases. This is going to be the foundation to lead us to making foam core tiles for our modular terrain system. So what we're going to do in this video is take some printed tile sheets, cut and score them, and we're going to mount them to the foam core so that we can have some new building blocks in our modular terrain kit to play with. These smaller size tiles will have tabs that come along with them on the page, but since there's not a lot of room on these 6-inch tile pages, I printed out a separate sheet that have tabs for the 6-inch tiles. Now, just to note before we get cutting here in the corners and the sides of the tiles, I have these white boxes, which is where we will glue our tabs. Totally optional step. If you have a tile that you don't think you're going to be putting walls onto, you can always make a tile without those in place. There are layers in the PDF to accomplish that. And if you want to forgo the modular terrain system altogether, you can avoid cutting out the sides. You can even just cut the 6-inch square right out the middle of the tile and stick that onto cardboard, or maybe just use on its own, tape it against some other pieces. You can even cut it down to arbitrary shapes that you want. Really use it any way you see fit on your gaming table. Just so you know, as we get started, I've got a couple of tools here. I've got a snap blade knife. I have a corkback metal ruler working on my cutting mat. And I'm going to be using some glue stick, some white glue, and I have some markers that I'm going to use to color in the edges as I progress. So before I get to cutting, the first step I go through is to score the sides of the tile so that it can wrap around the foam core. And so we're just going to gently make score lines. Once all that scoring is done, the sides will bend freely. We're going to go and now cut around the tile. You can use your ruler if you need to, but the precision is not quite as important as in other cuts. This is just trimming around pieces that will be hidden on the back of the tile. Okay, with that trimming done, the last bit of cutting I'm going to need to do for the tile is to open up these side flaps. This is going to match up with the notches that we put into the foam core base to allow plugs to slide in place. So I'm going to make a vertical cut starting along this top score line. I'll do that for 2 openings on this side, and I'll rotate, and I'm going to make 2 cuts to pop this rectangle out. Okay, I'm going to repeat that process for the other 3 sides. There we go. Next step is to fold everything and break out one of our markers so that we can color in the edges before it gets installed. All right, next step, we're going to bring in our foam core base and flip everything over. And I like to dry fit the foam core. I press the sides in, and I can feel sometimes that there is a piece that is a little bit snug. I'd like these to be able to press at least to a vertical position without a lot of resistance or pressure from the tile. And it feels like this side is just a little bit long. So what I will do is trim this down just a bit. See, I'm not taking much off. But now that feels more comfortable. You can really feel that that can glue in place more easily. Now, oftentimes what I will do is take a box that I may have, or my marker set, which happens to have a plastic storage case that I know is perfectly square, and I can use that to press the tile up against while I'm doing my gluing to get these perfectly vertical. I'm going to go and do these by hand. I don't have that handy right now, and you're certainly capable of lining these up by hand. Just take a step back while you're doing this and see, okay, are those sides vertical, or are they sticking out? Are they pushing in too much? If you had to choose one direction or the other, having them push inward is probably better than having them stick outward, because if they're out at the bottom, they won't press up against each other along the top edge, and you'll see that gap when you go and set up your table. Before you do the gluing too, I like to make sure that these flaps are all going to swing freely within that cutout notch. If it catches on one corner, take your craft knife and just carefully shave out a small bit of foam core. Doesn't have to be a lot. Carefully you don't cut through the surface of the tile, but that will help these swing back and forth. The last note I'm going to make before I continue on is sometimes you may be in a humid environment. Maybe you're using paper that isn't terribly heavyweight. And so the surface of these tiles you may find over time warps a little bit. And if you're finding that's a problem, I would recommend grabbing a scrap of cardstock, something that you can see I've cut down just shy of 6 inches by 6 inches in this case, so that I can fit it right inside this tile. And it doesn't go all the way to the edge, but it adds a lot of rigidity to the surface of the tile. So I'll often do that when I'm making tiles to make sure that they're very rigid. And I prefer to use a spray glue when I'm mounting this, but you could use a glue stick and get some coverage on there. Double-sided tape would also work. I wouldn't use a school glue, a white school glue, on a large surface like that unless you really have to. And if you do, have something that can spread the glue evenly, very thinly, and then let it dry for quite some time under something large, flat, heavy, like a stack of books, so that it glues, the glue dries flat. Okay, so here I'm going to now attach my tabs. And to get this done, I don't need to or even want to really apply glue to the surface of the tile underneath. I'm just going to apply to these 3 areas of each side flap. A little bit of glue here, a little here, and a little here. I just use my finger to spread this out. I can wipe it off on the surface it's going to mount to. And here's where I'm going to try and be careful to make this as vertical as possible. Give that just a second to dry, and then we'll move on to the next one. The reason we're not getting glue in this area here is that that's where our little foam core biscuits are going to slide in to connect the tiles together. And so if there's glue in that space and that glue is sticky, you'll have trouble connecting or disconnecting the tiles. So keep that free of glue. All right, so I'm going to go around the remaining two sides, glue this in place, and then we'll move on to using the tabs. All right, we'll set that aside, and let me grab my sheet of tabs that we're going to cut out. You may notice I have numbers on some of these tabs. In fact, each one of these rectangles, I put the number 1 on this first column, 2 on the second column, and so on, because they each correspond to a separate tile. And so I'm only making one tile here. I'm going to use the ones I've numbered 1. But if I'm making a whole bunch of tiles all at once, I might go through the process of trimming out a lot of tiles, and I don't want to get them mixed up. I want to make sure that I have a full set that matches the tile I'm working on. So I'm going to start by scoring the midline of the tiles, and I'll do all of them for this part. And now I'm going to cut out this first column. Okay, so you can fold right along that score line that we made. Now the next step is to glue these shut and let them dry. I'm going to use a glue stick for this, but I could use the white glue as well. And I'm going to grab a little piece of scrap paper, some of what I just made from cutting out the tile. And let's go and use some glue stick on this. Now, normally, even with using a glue stick, I would set this under something heavy to dry, just to avoid any warping. Glue sticks dry fairly quickly, so I'll be able to work with this now. So there are actually two types of tabs that we've got here. We've got tabs that are going to go on the side of the tile, and you can see those are these two here because they have a larger rectangle that we're going to end up mounting here. And so this one has all the 1, 2, 3, 4 corner tiles. And instead of having a large rectangle, we're going to cut these down the middle to make those squares for the corner. Now I work on the textured side only. And I go around and cut on the perimeter of each tab. All right, so I'm going to cut down the middle. And so here you can see that there is a little bit of kind of the back of this tab, this anchor on this side. I'm going to just use my knife to trim that off, clean it up, and then we can go and split these into our corners. Similar process for the side tabs. So next up, we need to color in the edges of these tabs. And the tabs are designed typically to use the exact same textures that are on the tile. That means each tab has a specific spot it's meant to go on the tile. And so if I were to look at this carefully, I can see this lines up with this pattern here. And I'm going to go around, color in the edges, and then find its rightful place on the tile. If you make a mistake, and I have made plenty of mistakes doing this, it really does not affect the utility of the tile at all. And for the most part, it doesn't really affect the aesthetics of the tile either, especially if you're going to be folding up these tabs and sticking a post on it. You won't even see it, but they can blend in pretty well wherever they go. Okay, we've got our tabs ready to be installed onto the tiles. For this, I'm going to use my white glue again. I'm going to grab another scrap of paper so I can kind of wipe my fingers in between, make sure my fingers stay dry. I'm just going to go one tab at a time and gently score along the dotted lines on the back of the tab. And then I'm going to just gently fold those arms out a little bit so that I can put some glue just on the rectangle or square that will attach to the tile. I don't want to have any glue on these arms of the tabs because those need to swing freely. They need to be able to be pulled up away from the tile. So we're going to go around each one, gently score. You really don't want to score too hard on this because you're just giving some guidance for where these arms are going to bend. You don't want to separate the paper so much that they're loose because they're going to be used quite a bit. So you want as much integrity. Okay, we've got all of our tabs in place. I'm just waiting for a brief moment for that glue to dry. And my last step in this process that I like to do is to take this tile, flip it upside down, and gently apply pressure from the corners where I know there's foam core. I don't want to press down in the spots where there isn't any. And the sides, this is where those tabs are, and this helps flatten everything out. So when I go to store this, this should store nice and flat. So now we know how to make our foam core bases. We know how to wrap them in textures. We can get going building up a really nice collection of modular tiles that we can connect to each other to build out our dungeons, our buildings, or whatnot. In future videos, we're going to talk about how to build the posts and the walls, kind of round out the basics of the modular terrain.